pretty good. Once again, here's the pretty card we are going to be making. It is a birthday wishes card, really nice for friends. Obviously female. Well, I shouldn't say obviously, but the pretty roses make it look great for a woman. I am using the Fancy Phrases stamp set, and it has this beautiful spray of flowers. They look like roses to me, but not sure if that's what they are. Let's see if I can move the light just a little bit. All right. And once again, this is one of those great stamp sets that has the art and the greetings. So birthday wishes, a little something for you, when I count my blessings. Not really nice stamp set. It's a cling mount stamp set, which means it's red rubber. And this is one of those stamp sets that does not have a coordinating cutting tool. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I dug up this technique to share with you. So once again, there's our project. We are going to be using the Fancy Phrases stamp set. And I'll share with you the tools that we need. First of all, I went ahead and I pre-mounted my stamps. I'm using that huge spray of roses, and I put that on the large block. I think this is block E. I'm using the small little spray with just some leaves and a couple little posies. That's on block C. And I'm using the Birthday Wishes sentiment, also on a block C. So those are the stamps I'm using. Because I'm doing heat embossing, I am going to be using Versamark as my stamp pad. And if you have ever done heat embossing with the powder, embossing powder, you know that this little tool comes in really handy. It's called an embossing buddy, and unfortunately Stampin' Up! Does not carry them anymore. Luckily, I have many floating around in my craft room, so I still use it. And you see I put a clip on it. That's because that kind of tightens it up and it doesn't release as much powder that way. So you just want a little bit of powder to kind of de-staticify, if that's a word, your papers, because you don't want any extra electricity or any extra attraction where you're going to be pouring embossing powder over it. And we don't want any extra flecks to fall in where we don't want them. Let's see. And I am attaching the microphone to help you hear it just a little bit better. All right, so with the Versamark, my embossing buddy, I'm also going to take this small brush. It's like a paint brush, and that's just to help clear off any extra specks that might fall on the paper. For my colored ink, I am using my Old Olive pad. It's a regular dye ink. And I'm using Stampin' Write markers. I am using Cherry Cobbler, and I'm using the Stampin' Write marker in Old Olive. For this technique, I need one of those spritz bottles, and these are in the catalog. You get two for, I want to say, under $5. They're not very pricey. Today I've just filled mine with water. This is kind of like a water spritzing technique. I'm going to need a sponge. And let's see, I'm going to need my heat tool, and you'll see that come forward when we get to that point. All right, now for my paper, I am going to be inking up a 5.5 by 4 1/4 shimmery white paper. And the reason I chose shimmery white is that it holds the water a little bit better. And it's kind of hard to see on camera. You will actually see small amounts of shimmer on the paper, and it brings extra sparkle to your project. So let's see. So my first step is going to be to go ahead and rub my embossing buddy all over the shimmery white cardstock. And that's just taking off any extra electricity, so we're not going to attract those flecks where we don't want them to be. Now I'm going to bring in my Versamark pad. You can see mine's pretty yellowed, and the reason that it gets that way is because Sometimes I don't clean my stamps very well and I get a little bit of ink stain on the sponge. No worries, it's still going to work fine. It just doesn't look pretty. So I'm going to bring in my huge spray with the roses. It's got a lot of line art going on. It's got a lot of leaves, some buds, and then the focal point flowers. And because of its size, I'm just going to flip it over, and when I apply my Versamark ink, I'm just going to tap down on it, make sure everything is inked up. And I happen to see a tiny little fleck in that image. I don't want that to come up on my image, so I just went ahead and took my Pick-a tool, the piercing tip, to pull out that tiny little white fleck that was in the stamp. So when I stamp down, I know that I'm going to want to create roses kind of bordering around, and I have a small sentiment that I'm going to put over here in the lower right. So I'm going to ink up kind of at an angle, and I'm going to go ahead and press down. Now here is one little issue that you might have with the Versamark. You actually can't see very well where you've stamped, because my stamp had a little bit of color from the previous inking. I can kind of see some little ghost areas, and that's actually going to be pretty helpful. That means I'm not going to be over inking or inking over where I've already inked up. I'm going to bring this up to the opposite corner. I'm going to be framing out the sentiment and stamping down. And right in the lower right, I am going to put my my birthday wishes sentiment, again with the Versamark. And one thing you could do if you have trouble seeing where you've already stamped, you can always heat emboss in between. So in other words, you could stamp down, go ahead and apply your powder, heat emboss so you see where you're stamping. Or in my case, I've got a little bit of residual ink on there, so I kind of see where I am. So I've got my birthday wishes on there. My last step, I'm going to take that small spray of tiny flowers with a little bit of foliage, and I'm going to just bring it in the corner, and it's almost like it's hanging into the frame. And I'm going to do another peeking from the top and another off to the lower right beside the birthday wishes. All right. So, not sure if you can even see what I've stamped. It kind of looks invisible. This is where the magic starts to happen. I'm going to bring in some black embossing powder, and I like to keep mine in a little container with a spoon. So, and what I'm going to do is just bring my stamped paper right over the container, almost inside, and I'm just going to start spilling the embossing powder right over the cardstock. Now you're going to start to see wherever I had laid the Versamark ink, you can see the powder is attaching itself to that pigment. So there are extra flecks of embossing powder on this at the moment, and that's okay. I'm going to just keep going. I'm going to put my powder all over, and I just kind of work in sections. This one in particular, it's a pretty big area to apply the powder, and I think I've got one more spray of flowers I need to get powdered up. All right, now the trick is to get off as much extra powder as you can. So you can see I'm kind of tapping it with my spoon. I'm going to turn it over and kind of pounce on it, get off the extra, and you might even be able to hear that pouncing. All right, I'm going to flip it over, and I see that there are some areas that have extra powder, and I want to eliminate that before I start heat embossing it. So here's where I'm going to bring in that tiny brush, and I see a little fleck right up here. I'm just going to brush it off, and there's another little spot up here. I'm just going to brush off this extra powder before. Once you start heating, you can't remove it. Once the heat is going to melt this, and it creates a texture and a raised area or raised image on the paper. Now I'm going to come in and work. There's a little bit extra at the bottom. And again, you want to do this before you start heat embossing. Now, for this particular project, I'm not going to be concerned if there's any fleck here or there because of the technique I'm going to be using. It is going to be covered anyway. So next step, and I'm going to go ahead and heat this up. I've got my heat gun going on here. Wipe off my tabletop before I melt on the tabletop. So I like to hold on to this with this little tool I have. It's like a little clip, and I just, instead of burning my fingers, I can hold the clip at a distance. And normally when I'm heat setting, I like to bring the gun underneath the paper. It just helps me visualize where the heat is melting the powder, and it's a little bit harder when you're right on top of it. So when I'm bringing it back, and the question might be, how will you know when it's done? So the answer is you're going to be seeing mostly shiny ink. Right now it looks dull. Once it's melted, it's shiny. And you can also do a little taste just by touching it. If you touch it and you lift powder off, that means it's not melted yet. So in this instance, because I have a large area, it's going to take a little bit longer to melt down. And you just want to take it slowly. You do not want to put the gun right up to the paper because it is very hot. This is much hotter than a hair blower would be. And if you get too close to your paper, you can burn it. You can scorch it. So you also want to keep it moving. Don't keep it right in one spot. That's what's going to burn it as well. Keep it moving. One other little effect you might have that you don't like, it might buckle the paper a little bit. And no worries, you're going to be able to flatten it out either when you adhere it to another layer, or sometimes just putting a heavier block on it for a little bit of time smooths it out as well. So I can see we're almost there. It's not quite as shiny as I would like it to be yet, which means I'm not done. And I have to tell you, just after embossing, you might think, this is beautiful. I do not need to do anything more to it. And you would be right. Just the small technique of the heat embossing makes a project extra special. Embossing powder comes in different colors. I chose black today. There's also a gold, there's a white, silver, and over time we've done other specialized colors. In fact, you don't really need any extra colors other than white, black, silver, and gold. You can make any color that you need, and that is a lesson for another episode. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go over the top, making sure everything is set. You do not want to go on to the next step until all of your powder has melted. So this one is taking a little bit longer, and one of the reasons is because you can actually heat your gun before you start melting. That'll make the process a little bit slower as well. But I can see most of the areas are shiny. I just want to be certain that it's all melted before I go on to the next step. This Floral Phrases is a beautiful stamp set with these flowers, really traditional, and makes a really pretty card. Again, I love that it has the sentiments right in it. And the image, the line art is different as well. Alright, and I'm just kind of holding. Alright. right, so I've gotten this far. My next step is going to be to color in this image, and here's where I take my 2 markers. In this particular case, I'm not doing any fussy coloring, so already that sounds like something that I would love, because I'm not one to take my time with coloring. I just like to lay the color on. So I'm going to go stamp by stamp or image by image, and all I'm going to do is kind of scribble it on there. I am not taking the time to go in and color, and you're going to see how ugly this looks. Maybe not pretty this looks with my coloring that I'm doing, but no worries, it's going to turn out fine. And that's often my motto when I am crafting. While you are crafting, things might not look right. You might feel like it's not perfect. And if you just pursue, keep going, in the end it's all going to come out fine. You're going to see. Not pretty, right? I mean, who colored this? A kindergartner or what? I am not trying to stay within any bound. Actually, I'm just trying to stay within the bounds of the flower. Any place where I want red. And you can see I'm not doing any kind of detail coloring. Just filling in the color here. Wherever there might be a flower or a bud that I want to have color. Right down here. Alright, what do you think of my coloring? Not pretty, right? Now I'm going to take my old olive and I'm going to do the same for the leaves. I'm just barely going to tap down some color. Oops, I see a little flower that got no color. So that's a good, easy thing to correct. Just go ahead and add some color. You can see, just like I did with the flowers, I'm barely laying down any color. I'm not worried about coloring all the way to the lines and making sure that each image is colored. I'm just pretty much pouncing around with the color. Try to put some in all the leaf areas. And let's see. Wow. What do you think? What do you think of my coloring so far? Not so pretty, right? That's okay. I'm not finished yet. I'm going to go on to the next step, and here's where it's helpful to put a couple of paper towels underneath your project. Alright, I am now going to take my spritzing tool. It has water in it, and all I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to make sure that my finger is right above the spray area, and I'm going to apply some spray. Oh, you know, before I get started though, I want to be ready with my old olive, because this is going to fill in the background. I'm going to need that, and I'm going to need my sponge. I'm going to have to work quickly once I spritz. So here I go. I'm just going to add some water here. I'm going to take my old olive and I'm going to pounce in my background. Pouncing all over. And I don't know, it's coming along. You can kind of see the general area. The red is staying in place. That heat embossing, that little bump that's created with the heat embossing, helps contain the ink in that area. Now, you could let it just dry overnight, or not even overnight, maybe half an hour or so, because I want to try and get going on it. I'm just going to bring in my heat gun, and you can see you can still kind of move a little bit of color around. And if you see areas where the color didn't spread well, you can still take your water and spritz, kind of move that color around a little bit more. The key is you are going to have to leave this to dry. Now, whether you heat set it and take care of it right away, or whether you just let it dry on its own, either way, you're going to have a nice technique. What I do sometimes when I am using the heat gun, I dry it on the front, then I'm going to flip it over and kind of blow on the back as well. That helps keep it from buckling, and makes the paper a little bit flatter to be heating it from both sides. All right. Okay, so I'm going to flip that over, and you can see I have a lot prettier card than I had when you were looking at my watercoloring. So not so pretty when I was coloring before. What I can do now, I can come back in with my marker and any little areas that need just a tiny bit of color, and I would not do this very much. You just want to fill in any kind of like those darker lined areas where you would see a lot of shadow. Otherwise, remember, this is a watercolor effect. If you try to add too much marker, you're actually going to muck up your project. Leave it alone. It's a beauty as it is. Now let's see. Because I wanted to move a little bit faster, I'm just going to bring in one that I had done previously. And as with many of my projects, I'm going to say no two projects are going to come up alike. They're all going to be different. The water is going to hold in slightly different areas. And what I'm going to do now, I'm actually ready to mount that onto my card. Now, if I do another card like I prepared in advance for you, I'm going to be using a cherry cobbler base and a mossy meadow matte. And this one has been scored horizontally, so it's going to be a top folding landscape card. That's cherry cobbler. And I need a mossy meadow layer that is 5 1/4 by 4. And because my paper was just cut into fourths, 5 1/2 by 4 1/4, now I'm going to be able to go ahead and trim it out. And you know what I'm going to use, my mini trimmer. And I'm going to be trimming it to about 3 7/8, just under that 4 inches. So I'm going to come in and see, and I might want to take a little bit from the top, a little bit from the bottom. So I want it to be just under 4 inches. There, and so about 1/8 under 4 inches. And I'm going to try and straighten this out. There we go. And then I want it to be about 5 1/8. Now here's where it's going to be tricky because my mini trimmer is not going to be able to measure. I can only go up to 4 1/4, but no worries, I can kind of eyeball it. You can see what kind of a crafter I am. What? Measurements? We don't need stinking measurements, right? We just need to trim a little tiny bit off. And I'm just going to see, I just want a tiny bit of the matte peeking through, so I just need about 1/8 off this end as well. Let's see. All right, let's see how that looks. Now remember, this is where I said the paper has kind of buckled, but this is where you're going to be able to lay it flat. Now it looks like I need just a tiny bit more off the top. I don't have as much border as I would like. So about 3 7/8. There we go. And I can use either my Stampin' Seal or I could use my liquid glue. Let's see if my Stampin' Seal has any. I had a feeling I was just about out. I should have added a new refill to it. No worries, I'm going to use my favorite. And I'm going to go ahead and mat this onto the mossy meadow. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I want to add a little bit of gold because this whole spray of roses seems like a little bit of gold would add a little extra sparkle to it. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and wrap. Oops, it's almost, that's the beauty of my favorite liquid glue. I'm going to do that twice. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and secure that down. Whoops. Yikes, a little bit too long. I'm going to go forward with it. Let's see. It's going to be a little bit oversized though. So I'm wondering how I'm going to fix that. It's still a little bit not quite the right size. Let me trim off my gold cord. There we go. And you know my trick of putting a glue dot under there so that the ribbon, or in this case the gold twine, stays intact. I'm just going to put one glue dot right underneath. I'm going to bring this in right in there. Whoops, right around there. And tie my bow. It's a big bow. Now I need to trim that down just a tiny bit, so let's see if I can put that on the trimmer and make it just a little bit shorter. It's going to be sticky. That's one of the things that worries me. I think I'm going to hand snip because I'd rather have it a little uneven, and you can see all I'm doing is taking off the tiniest bit. There we go. Not enough border for me. I wanted a little bit more. I'm going to have to move that out of the way. There we go. Whoops. There is my focal point. That is going to go onto the cherry cobbler, and I'm going to put a little bit of liquid adhesive. Flip that over. Whoops. And I'm going to double check. Whoa, there's my glue dot. Double check I have the fold at the top. There we go. Now my last step is going to be to add a little bit of embellishment. I am going to take some of the gilded gems. These are pretty gold faceted gem, and they come in different sizes. I am going to pick some small and some big. I'm going to start with let's see, I'm going to get one of the medium sized and put it right underneath and kind of come up a little. And you know, I like to do it in threes, so I'm going to bring another one in here. There we go. So now there's one way to mat that. We've got two now, but there's also another striking way that I found last night. Let me put those right there. And let's see, my other one is kind of dry. I'm going to go ahead and bring it in, and I'll show you. And I've got another dry one here. Let's see. I am going to bring in the Big Shot. Let's see if I can grab that without creating too much noise. And what I found was, because this focal art is so striking, you don't even need a mat underneath it. So what I did was create just one of the stitched rectangles, and it comes from the stitched rectangle dies. And I'm going to trim that out because I'm going to do one without a mat, and you're going to see how pretty it is just on its own. There we go. And you know how the magnetic platform has a mind of its own, so I'm just going to double check that I'm okay on all edges. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and cut that down. And let's see that. Out of the way. I'm going to pull this, and you'll see my frame is actually on here a little bit askew, and that's okay because my birthday wishes was a little bit off. It wasn't perfectly aligned. So here's an easy way to correct that. And I'm just going to peel off the frame, push out the die cut. All right. And what I'm going to do is bring this onto a black card. Now, because I'm using dark card bases, that means we're going to want to put another layer on the inside, a white layer, so that we can either stamp or write our message on there. So look how striking that looks on its own without a mat. We've got two versions going on here. And so what I do, I'm still going to add the pretty gold cord and tie a bow on it. You can see I'm wrapping 2 times. And yikes. What a mess on my worktop. All right. And I'm going to have a glue dot at the ready if I can find him here. I'm going to go ahead and have a glue dot ready to go. And I'm going to put that right underneath where I want to have my bow. Right there. Pin that down. There we go. Once it's in place, it's a lot easier to tie. There we go. And this one I'm going to secure on the back with some dimensionals. So here's my trick, my latest trick. My dimensionals I have taken a Sharpie and just made a line all the way across. That helps me when I am peeling them off at the back. I don't have to use the Braille technique of feeling to see if they're sticky. I can pretty much just eyeball it. If that black line is not there, I've already removed the backing. So make it really easy, eliminating the guesswork. There we go. And you know, I think I'm going to put another right in the middle, give it a little bit of support. I'm going to flip this over. Hey Debbie Pence, thanks for joining. All right, so I've got an equal border all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and push that down. And I'm wondering if it's too late. This gold cord that comes from the Forever Greenery combo pack, as soon as you cut it, it frays at the end. And that might be something cool that you like, not always though. So what I like to do is just tie a little knot at the end, and then you can kind of trim off some of that, those loose ends, not have such a fringy end to it. There we go. All right, and how about some gilded gems? Let's see, I've got some right up here. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to bring in one of the larger ones at the bottom. Right down there. And let's see if I've got some small left. These are a really nice alternative to my rhinestones. These already have a nice gold finish to them, but you've got to get the glue dot underneath. There we go. One up here, and let's see, I've got another tiny one way down at the bottom of the bag. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up in there. So there we go. My 2 cards using the 3 techniques. So we used heat embossing, we used the coloring with the Stampin' Writes, and we used this watercolor spritz technique. So let's see if I have some others to share with you. This was using, of course, Cherry Cobbler. I have another in which I used the Mango Melody. So really pretty summery feel to it. And I've got another that I used the Pool Party. Let's see if I can bring this up. Pool Party background. And on this one I sponged in Pool Party as well. So I've got that. And then finally, here's my other option with just the rectangle stitched die cut instead of matting. So there's our happy birthday cards, our birthday wishes. Perfect for let's see, like a summer birthday or even a fall birthday with the colors that we've used. Really nice set of cards to have on hand.